Hello, I'm Chris Godber of Alien Rabbit, and there's a film coming out about Oppenheimer soon. So I thought now would be a good time actually to read the Oppenheimer Blues, which is a short story I wrote a year and a half ago now, which features Oppenheimer. There's an upcoming film from Chris Nolan, directed by Chris Nolan, called Oppenheimer, and just thought it'd be an interesting time to read this story, do an interpretation of it, sort of thing. And just turn this down a bit. Yeah, that's it. That's what this video is going to be about. We're Alien Rabbit. We're a publisher based in the UK, independent publisher, new on the scene. Follow us, like and subscribe to find out more information. I'm Chris, one half of the publishing business, house as it were. Anyway, all that out of the way, I'll proceed with my reading of the Oppenheimer Blues. And yeah, enjoy. Okay, I'll just get my environment set up a bit more. This microphone a little bit closer. And here we go. The Oppenheimer Blues. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. Quote from the Bhagavad Gita. A red flash and a sound louder than anything imaginable rang through the barren desert space, rumbling and sending debris crashing all around. Oppenheimer looked ahead, goggles atop his face. The red flash burning into the back of his retina, as his unwelcome monstrous creation was born into a cursed world, the cigarette in his mouth falling to the ground in slow motion. All he could do was stare as this unholy child burst into existence with a birth cry of destruction, an unholy vortex of death, an abominable red ball of unbridled destructive energy. He smiled with a sly grin, knowing that his name would ring throughout eternity. That science would never forget the name Oppenheimer. He was indeed now the destroyer of worlds. Celebrations were short and undershot with a strange sort of melancholy, as the destroyer of worlds returned to his cabin to rest, the knowledge of his triumph foremost in his mind, and the knowledge of the horror he had brought forth into the hands of man burning uneasily also. He slept an uneasy night's sleep before finally the void claimed him. It was 1983, and in the Soviet Union, Stanislav Petrov was stationed at the Suburkov 15 base just outside of Moscow, Russia. It was the usual slow drudgery as he sat at his station. The early detection missile system which the Soviet government had helped to develop to detect a nuclear bomb launched from the Americans. Most nights were uneventful and quiet, but not this night, the night which would prove so fateful, not only for Stanislav, but for all mankind. Stanislav stared into the space. His shift had only just begun, and he had made all the formal checks before the start of his shift. It was an uneasy time in the Soviet Union, and relations between the government and the US were at an all-time low after the South Korean jet plane Flight 007 had just been shot down after drifting into Russian airspace. And the feeling of unease was wavering in the air, as the men stationed knew an attack could be more probable than any time previously. Then, the unthinkable. An alarm started to sound. Stanislav jumped up in shock. "Report!" he shouted, the unease present in his voice as it shook. "Comrade, it appears that we have a ballistic missile launch detected from the USA. ETA 20 minutes. Stanislav sat back in his chair, freezing in as he took the information he was given. He had to remain calm and stoic. He absorbed the information as more data came in. This seemed strange, he thought to himself, and he was still somewhat sceptical of the new computerized missile detection system that had been installed in the station. He tried not to think the worst, but he had minutes to make a decision that could alter the fate not only of the Soviet Union, but of all mankind. Another alarm sounded from below as Stanislav grew more anxious. Frozen in thought, he had minutes to act, and his actions would have an immediate effect. On his orders to High Command, nuclear bombs would rain down from the United States, triggering an event that would surely eradicate much of life on Earth. He had to report this to High Command, but he thought it strange that the US was attacking with so few missiles, thinking it surely would attack with an all-out attack with more of their arsenal. It was late, but he rang his commander at his home. "My God, Stanislav, what is it? You know what time it is." "Comrade, I regret to inform you that we've detected missiles in the early detection system, headed towards the Soviet Union. We have minutes to make a decision." His commander paused for a moment, gulping on the phone. "Give me your full report." "So far we have 5 missiles detected on the system, which seems unusual to me. The detection system has confirmed the missiles, but we don't know for sure before it's too late, so we must make a decision." His commander paused for a minute, contemplating. Then with a deep sigh said the words down the phone which would echo down throughout eternity. "Give them hell. I order you directly to launch a counter-attack on the US immediately. We will arrange as soon as possible to get as many of our population into bunkers. Comrade, you have done well to report this to me swiftly. Maybe we find the strength as a people, as a society, to get through this." Stanislav stared in solemn silence for a minute. The knowledge of his imminent death and all of the mortals who were to burn in fire, it was all out of his hands now. There was nothing he could do at this point. The top brass had the information at hand. What did it matter that he doubted it? They were done for. And with that, he sat down again like a silent statue and wept. It played out just the way we always thought it would. The Soviets struck first, their missile detection system being interpreted as an attack, launching their attack on the US, and the US, detecting the attack, launched their own counter-attack. The mad, mutually assured destruction routine was enacted in all its brutal glory. Billions burned in the flames, and all the world was left as a desolate wasteland. Their missile detection system malfunction being interpreted as an attack, launching their attack on the US. Billions burned in the flames, and all the world was left as a desolate wasteland, of only the roach surviving the nuclear winter that was to come. But it was not the end, as even in the most extreme circumstances, the cockroaches found a home. And they crawled and crawled for aeons, spreading across the globe as the dominant species, until finally the fine transfiguration as the roaches evolved over thousands of years, developing their own science, culture, and society. The white flash was all he would see in his dreams. The white flash and the sound of marching feet, like some insane repetitive banging of drums, left, right, the same monotonous rhythm every night, until the flash of white light rendered the scene silent and devoid of life. Emptiness and nothingness, a void in his mind. Every night the vision was the same, and Oppenheimer awoke in a sweat of agony. "Dreams again, dear," his beleaguered roach partner sighed, looking at him with dismay, as his evolved cockroach form rose from his bed. Oppenheimer represented something of a combination of a cockroach and a human being. A sort of hybrid which, whilst not completely like one, looked neither like the other. In other times his appearance would have been monstrous, but in this world, it was as normal as everyone else. Everyone on Earth not being a kind of evolved cockroach. "Yes," grumbled Oppenheimer under his breath, before sinking back into his pod with his wife destined to attempt sleep. He had a busy day tomorrow as it was. He was working on a new form of physics research for the Blue, and needed to have about his wits about him for the research. They were working on a new form of weapon, one that they hoped that would end the 20-year war with the red roaches. These goddamn hivers were persistent after all, insistent as they were on collectivism in their giant hives. Their sacrifices to the greater good. It was all such nonsense. Such airy-fairy roach shit, he thought to himself, before drifting into an uneasy sleep, far from the white flash and embraced by the nothingness of the void. The alarm sounded to Oppenheimer's right. It was 8 AM in the morning, and Oppenheimer scrambled out of his pod, cleaned himself up and ran out of his habitation. Heading quickly to the physics lab he called his second home, kissing his wife on the cheek quickly. "Have a lovely day, Oppenheimer," she said with care as he ran out the door. Today was an important day, as was each day at the lab. Working on the new energy weapon which may turn the tide of the 20-year war, an energy weapon that was at the cutting edge of physics, utilising all the knowledge the roaches had gathered collectively as their species. Everything they could recover from the extinct mankind's knowledge banks and scribes, and everything they had learned since. Oppenheimer dreamt in equations and graphs as he sat on the bus towards his base, dreaming of all the ways they could create the temporal singularity to swallow the hivers up, a mini black hole that would create a singularity in space-time focused on an area targeted, swallowing like an all-consuming monster anything in its path, to spit them out God knows where, before the breach spontaneously closes, leaving the unfortunate targets in oblivion. It was a dangerous work they were engaging in the lab for Oppenheimer, but it was necessary. The war had already laid waste to vast swathes of the world, already somewhat in ruin, now barely anything saved from the brink, now brought back by the obscene powerlust of the hivers and their ridiculous dream of an equal society for all. Oppenheimer saw his son in his mind. He had been drafted several years ago and was lost in the Battle of New York, near New York. A seminal battle in the war where the hivers attempted the first waves of invasions. Even to this day, Oppenheimer carried his photo with him, a reminder of why he must do what he must. He had no choice. He was the instrument of fate. If it wasn't us that did what must be done, the hivers would eventually develop such technology, and then what? True oblivion. Their lust for power knew no bounds. And so it was that Oppenheimer the man-roach had begun on his path to repeating history as his namesake before him. He was now the unwilling will of a destructive Behemoth. Oppenheimer arrived at the lab and entered it with his pass card, going through security as normal. His first duty was to report to the head overseer to report on the progress of the weapon. Theoretically, they had the physics and mathematics in place, but there were certainly questions hanging over the project. And of course, all of the scientists were aware of the potential consequences of playing with space, time, singularities, of unleashing that amount of uncontrollable power. It was a terrifying notion to the mind. The conception of the weapon was as a bomb that could be launched from a ship, a bomb that would create a mini black hole for a small amount of time, swallowing up all matter within a few mile radius. The hope was that it would only need to be used once. "Ah, Oppenheimer, good day to you," said the overseer enthusiastically, shaking his hand. "And where are you and the team up to with the technical stuff?" "We have produced the necessary calculations and done the required technical scoping, and we can confirm that theoretically the turret can be constructed or could be successful," replied Oppenheimer, a tone of caution wavering in his voice over the word "could." "This is fantastic. You have performed in an exceptional manner. We must initiate whatever testing is required. And please let my office know the resources you require going forward. We must proceed with the initial test next week, I think. Stay on schedule. Would you agree?" "Yes, sir. I believe it should be," answered Oppenheimer to the overseer, who was a military roach. He gave a curt nod and headed out the door to his right, walking steadily to his next appointment. Oppenheimer also headed out into a nearby balcony to get some fresh air. He lit a cigarette and stared into the distance, contemplating what he was about to unleash on the world, what manner of horror he would inflict upon the hivers. But every time he thought of his son's face, his ghost seemingly goading him from beyond the grave. Revenge, he thought to himself. Am I so malleable as to be consumed by it? It seems so basic, so primitive. No, he thought to himself. I do what I must because it must be done. The hivers given their way would consume this world of their damn idealistic dystopia. Their heaven on earth was nothing but a tyrannical lie. A tyrannical lie that had taken his son and many others and let half the world fall into ruin. Oppenheimer finished his cigarette, and the thoughts whirling around his head, and went back into the lab for a long day of work. Oppenheimer returned home at about 10 p.m. that night. His long-suffering wife had got used to it by now, but she understood that the work he was doing was of significant importance to warrant it, so she did not question or protest too much. It's always this way with men in their mind, she thought to herself, wrapped up in their projects more than they are with worldly things. But the nature of Oppenheimer's work, though she didn't know all the details, she felt assured in that it may offer a way to end this damnable war that took her only son, a wound that still bled deep in her soul. "Ah, good evening, dear," Oppenheimer said as he stumbled into the residence. "Good evening, my love," she responded. "A productive day at the lab, dear?" "Yes, it is almost time," replied Oppenheimer. "Our great work will commence, and we may finally see an end to the war. We can have a faint hope that our son's death might not have been in vain." Oppenheimer's wife winced at the mention of their son. "Let's sleep. I'm sure you've had a long day." "Yes, I'll settle down, have a drink and prepare the pod." Oppenheimer smiled and sat, and then they settled into their pod for another night of rest. But it was to be just another uneasy, restless light. Flashes before Oppenheimer's eyes. A strange being, one of the ancient extinct humankind, who Oppenheimer recalled from textbooks, appears before his vision. A pipe in hand, wearing a suit and looking sad, stands alone in a vast desolate, staring deep into Oppenheimer's eyes. He stared intensely at Oppenheimer. "Is the price worth paying?" he said in a slow, deep tone. "What price?" Oppenheimer whispered quietly. "Why, your soul, of course." The human man said, grinning in a menacing manner. "Is it worth becoming the avatar of death incarnate, my friend? The medium is science transmuting into the inherent violence of the cosmos?" The man appeared to be babbling and sobbing as he spoke, and as tears ran down his face, the desert burned with flames dancing around Oppenheimer, but he could not feel their warmth as they danced a sickening dance around him. "Will you become death, Oppenheimer, my son of destruction? Ever cursed by time, by God, by the devil?" It is immaterial where the cursing comes from, really. All that is certain is that it is our fate. And with that, the man began to laugh, his body melting and oozing before Oppenheimer, as he continued to chuckle until all that remained was a pile of bones and a suit. Oppenheimer tried to scream, but no sound had come out. He was trapped in a void of nothingness. His body had gone. The desert was now a blank void. Non-existence. The eternal nothing was all that surrounded him. 1,000,000 yards of emptiness was all that was his company. Oppenheimer awoke in cold sweats to an understanding but exhausted wife. "Another dream, but different this time," he reported to his wife. "There was one of the humankind there this time, some man, thin and wiry, muttering and talking about death." "It must be your work. It can be stressful, especially given its nature," his wife responded, concerned for her husband's well-being. "Perhaps take this pill and sleep. It may help." And with that, Oppenheimer took a sleeping tablet, which knocked him out for the rest of the night. Another day of daydreaming on the bus as he went dutifully on his way to the lab. What was that horrifying apparition he saw last night? What did it all mean? Surely his mind or his conscience speaking to him through the unconscious, he thought to himself. Second thoughts. He would have thought himself truly insane if he did not have them. Given the power his unholy creation would give to the hands of the blue, it was only rational to consider it. But then he thought once more of his son, how he had been brutally cut down and snuffed out by the hivers. He knew that maybe if they were to make an example to the hivers, it may yet prevent more bloodshed. A lesser evil, perhaps. This was the mark of maturity, he thought to himself, the precipice from which many a great scientist has had to cross many times before. This was his moment, and that was all there was to it. The bus arrived and Oppenheimer snapped out of his trance as he entered the labs for a day of work. The hour was drawing near. Not long before the weapon would be ready, and his hour of reckoning would be upon him. Time passed, the same routine, the same drudgery, all heading in the same direction. The terrible and wondrous day of the weapons testing. Oppenheimer worked hard and slept little. Insomnia gripping him as every night he slept he would dream of that terrible man with his secrets, with his pipe and glasses, eyes bearing down and burning into his soul with that horrible inhumane grin. So Oppenheimer took to stimulants to keep his tired mind and body going. A price, but a price worth paying, he thought. His thoughts ever present on his wife and son, and the goal of peace through destruction, but still, it was the end goal that mattered, not the cost it took to get there. And finally, for all the shit and the hard work and the sleep-deprived days and nights, he arrived at his own precipice. The day of reckoning was at hand. The first step to peace, a peace which would be born from a multitude of death and sacrifice, a new beginning from the void of the black hole weapon. It was almost poetic, Oppenheimer thought to himself. Seated now on the ship that contained his terrible creation, he was to be the scientific witness as the ship's cargo was deposited on the hivers below. A recording was to be produced to use as propaganda against the Reds. A warning, one that he hoped would register and get them to give up their insane egalitarian lust for power. The ship lifted off, T-minus 2 hours to its target, a hiver housing district and power plant. The target was both strategic, the power plant powered much of the hiver infrastructure in the area, and propagandistic, as it showed we were willing to use these weapons on civilians. Oppenheimer did feel a pang of guilt about this, but once more as he stared out of the ship's window as it took off, he put the thought in the back of his mind. Then he started to drift into sleep, his eyes slowly rolling back into his head, and he fell into darkness. The man with the pipe stared deep into his soul, pipe smoke billowing, and chuckled once more at Oppenheimer. "Who are you bastard?" "Me, the instrument of fate." His tone was final and blunt. What could it mean, thought Oppenheimer. "Your name," he thought. At this, the man with the pipe chuckled. "You fool. I am you." "Wait, what?" "Throughout time, we have had such blues, my dear Oppenheimer. A different face, granted, but the same soul, burning with blind ambition. Unaware of the very real burning we create through our unholy magic. The Pandora's box we open, never to be closed again. The cycle of life and death. But we answer only to one master. The answer to the riddle is clear. We are deaf. You are deaf. You will become deaf. You shall see, and in that final moment, all shall become clear." Sir, it's time!" Oppenheimer awoke with a jolt. I nodded off. "It's time, sir, we are about to use the weapon. Please report to the observation deck. We've encountered little resistance but managed to push through. We will be launching the weapon in 5 minutes. May the roach above have mercy on us all." Oppenheimer thought before setting off into the observation deck to observe the destruction his imagination was to wrought upon the world. Oppenheimer stood before the console in the observation window, looking below at the urban areas and the machinery below. The overseer was in his craft and gave the order. "Fire at will!" And with that the bomb was launched from the ship's weapon systems. He could make it out just on the various monitors as it fell silently on its target, the main structure of the power plant below. The ship already started to tear away at the full speed from the target, a few expendable monitoring drones left behind so we could monitor the situation as it escaped the impact zone. And then it happened. The noise was louder than anything Oppenheimer could have prepared for, as the bomb exploded and inverted itself into an infinitely heavy zone of mass as he had conceived. The sound of smashing metal and crushing steel rang heavy in the air as the mini black hole began to consume all matter. People, things, all were sucked into an impenetrable noir gaze. Men, women, children screamed in confusion as they were ripped to pieces as the radius of the gravitational pull grabbed them mercilessly. ripping their skin from bone and reducing them to mere nothingness. Piles of pathetic matter crumped up and consumed by this monster he'd helped give birth to, the Leviathan he had brought forth from the depths. The image of the grinning man leered in his mind, grinning even more deeply than ever now. You are the tool of fate, the thought echoed in his mind. We did it, the overseer said, extending his hand. Oppenheimer shook it, but worried if the price was worth it. The Oppenheimer Blues. It never ends. From man to cockroach, one big party of destruction, pathos, ambition, science, horror. The end. So obviously it's quite a interesting tale. There's a audiobook version of Suicide by Computation, which stories is a collection from, coming out soon. So if you enjoyed this, that's coming soon. It's also available in paperback on Amazon. Suicide by Computation. Chris Godber, that's me. Yeah, that's one of the stories from it. I thought just because Oppenheimer's sort of back in cultural awareness again, it's probably a good time to just do a bit of a voice recording of it, basically. Yeah, that's that. Leave your comments below if you have any comments on the reading or the story itself, or what you thought of it, or anything really. Any feedback's welcome. And yeah, that's that. I've been Chris from Alien Rabbit, and hope that was interesting and enjoyable story to listen to.